quick introduction. I am Ryan, one of the account managers, product managers for MyStrategicPlan. Purpose of this call today, the Strategy Huddle, as always, is to talk strategy, to talk execution, and to address some real-world questions, and ultimately provide you with some ideas and actionable solutions. Some quick ground rules. Presentation is targeted for 45 to 60 minutes. We definitely encourage your participation. If you identify yourself with a topic or a question, by all means, use a chat box on the right-hand side or raise your hand and we will open the floor to you. If you're one of the people on the headset, you could definitely use a chat box and we will read that question or the feedback. Post-call, we'll email a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording. We'll get that done by end of the week. We typically get that done either today or tomorrow. And it's important just to note that this presentation is not rehearsed. It's topics that people have submitted that we're trying to answer and build on. So that's why we encourage the participation, keep us lively and engaged. We did send out over the last, heard some feedback in the last survey from last month's Strategy Huddle. 72% of participants wanted to take a deeper dive on a single topic. We kind of mapped out some feedback we've heard over the last couple months of topics to dig into, and that's why the topic today is chosen on some innovation strategy. We will dig down into that in just a minute. I'd like to take a minute just to introduce today's Strategy Huddle leaders, and that's Erica and Howard. Both are co-founders of M3 Planning, which is the parent company of MyStrategicPlan and really the brains behind the intellectual property of the system. Howard is the president and co-founder of M3 Planning and has a PhD in marketing with an emphasis on research. A lot of the work on the research side of the business and linking into strategy is driven by his direction. Erica is a COO and also a co-founder of M3 Planning. She's also the author of the Strategic Planning for Dummies and has several spot training videos on strategic planning, both on our site as well as on YouTube. And PowerPoints are now listed up on SlideShare, so you can see there as well. Both Erica and Howard are involved in the MyStrategicPlan system day to day, but much of their time and their focus is on the professional side of the business, and that's on the road facilitating strategic planning meetings, consulting, and working with clients. With that said, I'll turn it over to Erica and we'll get this started.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Howard.
Good morning to all.
As Ryan mentioned, we are going to do a deep dive on innovation today. So the agenda that we are going to dig into is, of course, we always like to have a strategy stat of the month, so the strategy stat will be around innovation. And then kind of breaking these into three buckets, if you will, and it's a little bit of a misnomer, but that's okay. Innovation strategies, the shallow dive, meaning we're going to talk about two strategies that are actually perhaps in theory easier to execute against, and then a deeper dive into the ones that are a little bit harder, and then just talk maybe about next steps. So I think what's important about today is, we sort of structured it as the question of innovation strategies. A lot of talk about it. How do you really do it? And I don't think that anybody would say it's easy. And I also think it's something that it's kind of something we talk a lot about in business, in government and nonprofits today, and it's sometimes hard to sink our teeth into and get some real traction on what we mean by that. So our intent today is, as we always are, is just to frame the discussion. We can have a whole week conversation on these things, but just to frame the discussion so you can take that framework back and say, all right, so how are we thinking about this in our organization? And I just want to also share that this is just one way to think about it. There's a lot of different ways to talk about innovation. So we're definitely talking about it from a strategy perspective. So with that, let's jump on in. Howard's going to take us through the strategy stat of the month.
Erica, I was thinking about what you're just saying about strategy, and I have to give Erica a compliment. She put the slides together for this, and this is one of the times I've seen one place where all the innovation stuff is all put together, because people talk a lot about strategy and what is innovation and what does it really mean. And our guru Michael Porter says innovation is a central issue in economic prosperity. It's his quote, and I think because we find ourselves in times of economic bouncing around, and there's even some more sad news that are out there which we don't want to go into, I think we're looking for some economic prosperity. And to dovetail maybe a little bit on what we had last month at Strategy Stab, we're talking about heroes and casualties in downturns and so forth. And we find that in economic uncertainty and so forth, if we're disruptive, we can make more of an impact for our organization. So innovation is one of those things that you really can make an impact. So what we've got here is a stat, it's a couple of years old, and we're trying to find something that was a little bit more current, see what folks are really doing given in the midst of this economic downturn. And I found some stuff out of Accenture, and they're basically saying all about the same thing, that innovation is a priority. It ranks right up there in things that they want to do. And this one shows us that between, if we add the top two together, top priority or the top three, we're over about 65, 2/3 of the companies say that innovation's right up there. And we'll see that Europe and the U.S. it's really an important factor for them to move their organization forward. Also, I found another stat, and I think it came out of OECD, but we always compare as Americans. We look at the Japanese; they come up with a lot of stuff. And anyway, we found that in theory, Americans are twice as innovative. However, that was measured as the Japanese. But Japanese government grants 3.5 times more patents, and we always think patents are tied to innovation. So innovation is a situation that we need to rank right up on top, work at it, and companies are really looking at it. So we're going to dig deeper into how we can really do this. So Erica, why don't you take your first strategy or innovation strategy and dig into it?
Okay, so as we noted, we're going to talk about two types of innovation strategies that we call the shallow zone. And then we're going to move into a conversation of looking at some of the other ones that are a little bit deeper. So innovation strategies, they're the name of the game. That's what we say. How do we really do this? Let's look at what they actually are. And this is, of course, built from perhaps the easiest to the most to the hardest, or the hardest to implement. Let's just call it that. So we're going to talk about the shallow dive ones of being business process and technology together. So those are lumping into a cost innovation discussion, and then product service innovation, moving up the pyramid to business model innovation, and then a big kahuna around behavioral innovation. So a lot of debate in some of these areas, and again, our intention is just to frame it out, to have you have a structure, go back to your organization, say, yeah, what are we really, when we talk about innovation, what are we really talking about? How extensive is this for us? And I don't want to undershadow the fact that, cost innovation, product service innovation, those in and of themselves are certainly significant enough to bring to market and add value to organizations in and of themselves. But the point, of course, here is to try to say, well, let's not mix them up. Let's be really clear about the type of innovation or a combination of. And they're not always necessarily all that cut and dry either, so I just want to share that as well. So, there's definitely overlap here, too. So let's jump in to the two related to the shallow, and you can see. I'm sorry. Before we do that, let's go back to the study that we were looking at before, which was the McKinsey study that Howard talked about, and digging a little bit deeper into the statistics there. What types of innovation are organizations pursuing, and Howard's going to talk to us about that.
Well, as we look at the McKinsey study, and again, just because it's a couple of years old, I really don't think it's any less representative of what's going on today. And I'm quite sure all of us can get our arms around the number one innovation that organizations pursue, being product innovation, because a lot of times what we're just dealing there is a product extension, taking something we really have and add on to it and so forth. And similarly with service, when we start getting on into process and business model, we're talking about some serious changes and so forth, which we're going to dig into. But the point I really want us to take away from this one, and I found with a lot of the reading, whether it was an HBR or a couple Accenture articles on this, is that organizations have a difficult time assessing innovation. They have a difficult time assessing how to carry it through, and they also have a difficult time assessing the benefits from it. we're making this investment, whatever it might be, so what's the return for us? And so you can see the comparison between the two. The product innovation is a whole bunch easier to measure. There's only a difference of 17 points. When we get down into service, okay, so we're going to do some service innovation. How the heck do we measure this thing that we're bringing into? And you see there's a 28-point difference between the two. So our recommendation, and from what I've seen from going through this, is when we start pursuing innovation, let's try to figure out how we're going to measure it, because it's going to be so much more effective, Erica, when we do this. So let's look at probably one of the easier ones, the technology and business process innovation, and we can probably measure that one a little bit easier. But again, let's get our arms around it.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's jump into the first set of shallow dive strategies, which is business process and technology innovation. And moving into this, for each one of the strategies we're going to talk about, we are going to just provide a little bit of backgrounder and then really focus on some case studies. So that's how the flow of each of these will go. Again, being mindful of the fact that we're just scratching the surface on some of these items, and how you apply this in your organization is really, really we'll need a deeper dive. So one of the things that we know, and we're gonna sort of change the language on this right now from thinking about technology and business process innovation to really cost innovation. So we're doing these most of the time, these types of actions, and we may or may not consider them innovative per se, but we're forcing these actions because of the economic climate we find ourselves in, also from the need to tap into developing markets and those requiring a different cost structure. So one of the things that's forcing this, and we've all been listening to the news about this, of course, is that consumer spending is rapidly declining. Okay, fine. So we know that. Moving on to what we're seeing in organizations, and what I'm sure you're all seeing in your organization, is how do we do things for less money and maintain the value that we're providing to our customers. And the point related to this is how do we do this without gutting the organization? And again, of course, maintaining the value proposition, and then some, right? And then some. There's a lot of organizations that we're working with that not only have to figure out how to improve margins, get rid of the fat and the cost, as well as increase the value and the value creation to customers in order to maintain their market position. So, Howard, do you want to talk us through this? I know you're really passionate about what this economic environment's doing to companies and governments, frankly. So,
yeah. Well, again, we speak from the capital of high unemployment of the United States, where people are chopping left and right. So, and we all know that to play the game anymore, it's about value. You have to have that. We can't even enter into the game. So, it is a strategic imperative. So we found when we first went into this downturn and so forth, I kind of look at the top part of what everybody's doing. We're finding cost cutting. That's kind of me, like that's a top-down thing. That's, let's just start chopping a percentage of this, a percentage of that. The budget's back 5%. Send it around. How are you going to do? That's kind of what happens. And one of the things we can eliminate, and we're seeing, that's the top two things we're seeing here, is people our marketing budget is being whacked, and as well as there's another obvious thing here is you can cut back on your 401k contributions. I've got my own little bugaboo about the marketing budget, because I think people should increase it now, because you can get your message told a little bit more. But since we're going to probably be in a protracted downturn, what we really need to do is, what everyone needs to be doing, is the bottom up. Let's really go on and assess what we're doing and get a team together and look at that, so we can cut the cost out but still maintain the value. The perspective I want to throw at that is reading two places, both OECD, and there's a HBR article, Harvard Business Review article out this month, when they're estimating within the next decade, next 10 years, India and China will have 2 to 3 billion, B as in billion, middle-class consumers. Okay? That does not mean that the middle class in China equates to middle class here in the U.S., but it's gonna middle class there. So we've got to determine how we can serve them with value. We can't serve them with the same program we have. So we got to go back in, get the fat out, look at it, return the value, and keep the cost down. I mean, that's a huge market to even, can't get my arms around 2 or 3 billion more middle class. So there's going to be something there, but how are we going to do it? So we've got to be innovative on how we're going to cut these costs but still provide value.
So one example that I wanted to throw into this conversation before we move on is an organization that we're working with, and they haven't had an innovation strategy in place like everybody does, and innovation is related to bubbling good ideas up from the bottom and putting them on a website and then evaluating them, and then it goes into some pipeline, and it either produces more products or more services based on some evaluation method. And we'll talk about that in the next slide set. And there's nothing wrong with that, and that's fine. Well, one of their larger customers came back to them 12 months ago and said, okay, love you guys, great, but we're taking your service out to RFP. You got to put in for the business just like everybody else does. There's some competitors out there that are doing it cheaper, better, faster, and this is a service organization, and we think that you need to decide whether you can as well. And so related to trying to maintain that business is, of course, the customer forcing the cost, or in this case now cost innovation, and the solution to that, of course, is the flip side, which we've been talking about, which is the modifying the business processes and being sort of crass about it, replacing headcount with technology. In this organization, that was what it was taking to drive the cost down. And if we look at most P&Ls, I would suspect that the majority of, especially, I'm thinking about the service business for right now, but service business, government, good example, is in headcount, it's in payroll. So a lot of the innovations need to come from how do we do things more efficiently, which again is, that sounds like boiling the ocean most of the time, and how do we leverage technology, which is an expense, but it should, of course, if we're offsetting, unfortunately, headcount with that, then that's how we drive costs out of the supply chain. So that's what this organization was being forced to do, and they were being forced to do it from their customers. And I guess I would just say, how do we get ahead of that? So kind of looking at the next slide, and we'll move on. This is what Howard was talking about. Is here's just 3 examples of organizations that were going after the developing markets, or in this case, Hire was going after the U.S. market. Some examples about cost innovation and value creation at the same time. So we know we'll be sending these slides after the fact, so I won't go through those right now. Looking at the next bucket of innovation strategies, of course, is the one that we're all familiar with, which is product and service innovation. So what I'd like to share through this is a handful of slides, again, because we're going to share these with you afterwards. Ryan will be sending out the PDF of these. You can use them for your reference, and part of what we want to do is just give you tools. So the slide that we're looking at right here is a way to help you evaluate, is a set of evaluations from left to right related to where are we getting our ideas for new products and service innovations. Is it, and I'm looking very much sort of shopping for our ideas, are we really greenfielding, bubbling up from internally? Obviously, the difficulty around that is higher, of course. The risk is higher, the investment's higher, versus all the way on the right-hand side, are we shopping for market-ready products? Is it just looking at what might actually be out there that we can buy or piggyback on and bring that to market, of course? And so, or in some cases, acquire companies to buy what they have in a lot of cases. So, and of course, the risk appetite in that particular side of the product service innovation is lower. So this is just kind of, and I don't want to go through all this because there's a lot on here, but it's a way to help you evaluate where are we getting our ideas from for our product and service innovation, and what's the risk level that we're, where's our appetite in the organization, and the different ways to think about which type of product service innovation strategy that we're going for. So let's look at this case study of an organization that we worked with. And before I move on, sorry, Howard, go ahead.
The the slide that we had up before, just so folks know, that came out of an HBR article.
Right.
And the reference got bumped off the bottom. We didn't dream this up. And basically what happens is the more risk we're willing to embrace, the lower the cost with the innovation, okay? If we do not lower the risk, backwards. If we're not willing to embrace risk and it's going to cost us more, if we're willing to embrace a whole bunch of risk, then the cost goes down and obviously the time to market goes down. So there's a chart that you can look at that's in the HBR article as well. And I would there's the third row down. We're talking about market potential for typical innovation. I don't know that that's really apropos anymore by bucketizing the type of revenues you can get off that. So nor the company size, because there are so many opportunities out there today that I think that we shouldn't be putting those blinders on. So thanks for letting me add that point in there.
Yeah, that's perfect. So let's actually put some feet to this. You know, one thing we always really espouse in our discussion is being practical, and some of this feels a little bit academic sometimes, you know, a little ivory tower. So let's make some of those ideas practical. Here's a case study of an organization that we worked with that was trying to go from a fragmented product innovation approach to something that was a little bit more refined. And of course, the intention behind being refined is actually going from idea to a sold product in a fairly rapid amount of time, depending upon the industry that you're in. So what we're looking at on the screen here, and this is something that you can use as a tool for yourself, just to kind of be more rigorous about your product or service innovation strategy. And this is an innovation process about moving and as you can see, from moving from ideas to actually a market-ready product. So for phases, of course, idea generation, internal, external. So that was the previous slide. Where we're getting our ideas from. That's that evaluation bucket there. Moving from that to, of course, going from idea into the pipeline and converting it to design and developing it, launching and monitoring it, and then managing it, and then of course the circle around to that is planning the portfolio. So another organization that we're working with, not this case study that we're looking at here, you know, one of the reflections I had and just having an external viewpoint on what they're doing is, you know, they have so many product service ideas that are generated from their customers that they start to be a little bit diluted about their ability for the sales folks to actually sell the product set and the service set, because it's just too much. And I was kind of talking a little bit, you know, about, you know, not every idea is a good idea. I mean, we all know this, and but what happens when you're on the other end of the spectrum where you just have too much and you haven't really planned the portfolio? So I think that that's an interesting thing, and we'll look at that in just a second. Just kind of think about that a little bit, and are all of these generating revenue? They are. Do they all have market value? They do. But if we can't actually manage the whole portfolio, it starts to fall apart a little bit. So back on this process slide for just a second, we're looking at the boxes that are in orange. And again, you can kind of look at this yourself and adapt it for yourself. But those are the departments that are responsible for being part of each one of these phases. And then the bolded items on there was kind of a goal around each of the phases. And then in this case, we have some metrics, and these are metrics that were applied to this organization, but you can kind of apply them to yourself as well. As how do we know that we're moving effectively through the innovation process? So we've got the process, we've got who's involved, the goal of that phase, and then the specific metrics for each phase. So pretty straightforward, and this is really effective for this organization to go from a fragmented scatter-shot approach to product innovation to something that was a little more streamlined and rigorous. So, and of course, after each phase, there's a phase gate, and some of these products fall off, or ideas fall off. So actually, let's look at the next slide related to that specifically. This is the operational process that supports the innovation process. So for this organization, this was a pretty important tandem process to have in mind as we were putting in place the innovation process. So we'll move past this, but the structure is the same. So here is the output, if you will, or the tool that this organization was using to manage the innovation process. So they had their process map, of course, but looking at the product and service innovation strategy, it came together in what they were calling a segment scorecard. So in this case, it's a market segment. And we have our idea pipeline, so that was back to our first phase of the innovation process. Of course, we have some ideas that are revolutionary. We have some that are new technology. Some are new sourcing ideas, and some are line extensions. So that goes back to the initial slide that we had in this slide set, which was where are we getting our ideas from totally raw, revolutionary to just line extensions from what we already have. How do we view that against what we're already selling into this market segment, and what parts of the market are we not serving? And that was one of the evaluation tools that were used to make sure that when we brought a new product to market, that it was actually, how did it fit with the rest of the set, which is what I was speaking about earlier. So our segment scorecard has the list of the current products, how many have been sold, the percent of sales. We can kind of see how effectively we know. In this case, we have one product that's doing remarkably well. When it was launched, so how old are they? And then you can see the new products right there, potential market opportunity. That's where the new ones were coming in. There's a list of threat products as well. And then we had created sort of the trash bin. Let's not forget about the ones that moved through the innovation process and got chucked because they didn't meet the, in this case, the low innovation quotient. That was a way that we evaluated whether or not they were value creating for the organization, products they just wouldn't produce, or just dead products. So this is a view of how to effectively manage the portfolio. In this case, we call it the segment scorecard. So with that, we're going to jump into business model innovation.
Business models, yes.
So business model innovation is really about redesigning the value chain. So this is now moving from the shallow dive innovation strategies to something that's a little bit deeper. And bringing in everything that we can from all sorts of best practices and great consulting organizations out there, IBM being one of them, of course. They had this cool framework for business model innovation that Howard's going to speak to. But I just wanted to share that 2 times ago on the Huddle, we talked about a business model innovation case study for a church. And I think if this is something that you're thinking about, certainly there's a lot more to talk about related to just straight up, how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we reinvent our value chain and how do we think about how we deliver value in the context of our whole organization? And the business model is certainly one way. Business model structure and process is one way to do that. So Howard, talk to us about the 3 types of business model innovations.
When I review these, definitely they're not siloed. There's, whenever an organization goes into some type of different revamping of their business model, there's going to be some crossover. But probably the easiest way to look at these would be the industry model would be innovation would be an external perspective, and the enterprise model on the right side would be an internal perspective. And where I would put those, I would call that almost like a disintermediation. Let's pull the whole value chain apart and figure out if there's some part of it that's not bringing value, let's dis it. Let's get rid of it, intermediate, bring another mediation, add some together. There's all kinds of examples we could go into that have done that, where, online, where you've got organizations like Amazon brought things together, the Knot for weddings and stuff like that. They kind of jumped in and they brought all these things together and took out the places that were just sucking costs out of things and not bringing value into it. So whether it's from an external perspective or an internal perspective, that's the way to look at your value chain. And then the third one, the revenue model, I think the way to look at it is just let's pull our revenue stream apart. Can we add some things together and bump up the price because we've done more value? Or we've got a lump sum of a number of things and we pull it apart and we price each one. So we can then, the sum of the parts are greater than the whole in that type of thing. So either we add them together or pull them apart and be able to change the amount of revenue that comes from that. To look at this, which came from this article that IBM had put together over a 10-year period. So it isn't that one is better than the other. You can look across that, and you can see Google. Obviously, everybody's aware of Google and all the money and everything that they've made and so forth. And they took all three models and put it together and made a difference. But then you can go all the way over to the right side where there was a single model. And that's an Indian telephone company, and what they did is they took the cost out and figured out how to reprice things, and they were on the rocks, actually. They were going out of business. They were forced to look at what was going on, and they went from death's bed to the fact that right at the top of the kind of making all kinds of money because they had to innovate. They had to reevaluate what they're doing. And they focused on just one of the models. So there isn't one right, there isn't one wrong. It's what makes most sense for your organization. But it does provide a perspective on how to look at innovation for the kind of way or how you're really doing business and how can you really bring better value back into the process. So talking about the value, Erica, you've got the next slide that you want to talk about, which is a little bit different than the Calvary Church that we did a couple months ago. It gives it a different perspective.
So looking at, and we're all familiar with the two sort of, what IBM did however many years ago, moving from, selling servers to selling businesses. But I think this is just an interesting thing, especially to kind of think about where IBM is right now and where HP is right now. And this is the sucked down version of the business model diagram that we did look at a couple months ago. But just from a simple view, of course, is looking at how HP's value proposition, of course, is consumer electronics, probably add to that business as well, and with thin margins, who are they reaching the consumer market segment, and the distribution is retail. And then IBM, fundamentally shifting from that, which that's how, they were obviously selling business electronics and servers and that type of stuff, to being a business services organization, and that's a fundamental business model shift where the value proposition is no longer the product but the service. Larger margins, obviously reaching the business market, and the distribution channel and the competencies is no longer around retail in their case, but around the sales team and of course the delivery team, if you will. So I just think that's a really sometimes simple way to think about business model shifts, and IBM is obviously the poster child for an effective business model change. But to the more practical or perhaps more tactical way to think about this was the example of the church moving from a big mega build it, they will come, to we are going to fundamentally change how we reach our congregation by going to them. And that's a shift that they feel like the market is making in their area, and thinking about what the value of their congregants are asking for, and how they reprogram themselves, if you will, or reorganize themselves to deliver on that what the market is asking for. So those are some thoughts on the business model value creation discussion. Let's look at the last strategy, which is another deep dive strategy, and this is something that I think it's Howard and I were having some fun talking about this as we were preparing, and certainly it can feel a little touchy-feely, but I also think if we're willing to think about it a little bit more robustly, this is kind of where the big potential innovations exist. So let's look at a couple examples of what we're talking about with behavioral innovation. So behavioral innovation is that idea of fundamentally thinking about our organizations as stewards, as trustees, as challenging sort of leadership, challenging the status quo, and then seeing our customers as partners and focusing on people's outcomes. And so I think really when we're talking about behavioral innovation, and that previous slide said it's all about the people, it's about our organizations having a mindset shift from perhaps just being bottom line driven to being the triple bottom line idea that we're thinking about past the profit, to our impact and the outcomes for our customers, for our partners, for our employees. So there are some examples on here, and we could certainly spend some more time on this, but I want to say that it's pretty easy, and this sounds a lot like a corporate social responsibility, and it being a corporate social responsibility initiative. And you can look at all these organizations, Tom, Starbucks, Walmart, Patagonia. It's on its face value, what we're talking about could just very much be that box of we're going to have corporate social responsibility goal, and we're going to work with XYZ nonprofit and provide X number of employee hours towards contributing to our community, et cetera. What we're talking about here around behavioral innovation is much more structural than that. It's much more about the hard choices around prioritizing outcomes and prioritizing our partners and our employees and our customers first, and thinking about how everything shifts to be more steward-focused and trustee-focused instead of just profit-focused. And so I think related to that, when we look at, and here's just kind of an example of what those are, and we'll talk about those in just a moment, but Tom's Shoes is, of course, an interesting one, and they've been all over the news, and folks are probably pretty familiar with the fact that their business model and therefore their innovation and is behavioral in nature is, you buy a pair of shoes, and that pays for another pair of shoes for someone in a country in which they're shipping them or delivering them to. So again, that sounds a bit like just a corporate social responsibility initiative, but it's not when we think about the fact that the product has to have market value. People have to want their shoes. They have to have a cost a structure that allows this one-to-one. You have to be able to sell the shoes to people at a cost that allows you to produce a second set of shoes with the margin that you're creating from that. You have to make money as well. That would be useful. And then you have to have a group of employees that are willing to get on a plane and go distribute shoes in Argentina. And that may sound all well and good and easy, but that's not something that you can just slap on an organization. That organization was built that way, and it was really built around that innovative idea. Okay, fine. So what do you do when you have an existing organization?
Which is a big
challenge. And I want to toss it over to Howard in just a second, but I want to say, Starbucks is an interesting example of, and they were on another slide, certainly their behavioral innovation on its outset, again, looks very simple, working with free trade farmers, and making choices to only use coffee beans that are from free trade farms, and not essentially exploiting the farmers. And of course, has to have market value, has to be willing to pay $5 for a cup of coffee. Okay, fine, we're all used to that. Well, Starbucks is kind of in an interesting place right now. They're not growing like they used to. Brought Howard Schultz back in, great article in HPR last month related to choices that they made. They could have made a choice to franchise. They could have said, well, Wall Street's asking for us to continue to deliver the returns that we've been delivering historically. One way to do that is to franchise, and due to the sort of place that they found themselves in, and Howard Schultz came back in and said, we're not doing that. And one of the reasons we're not doing that is because core and central to our organization is our people and our ability to drive the values that we believe in through the organization. And if we franchise, we'd fracture the culture, because we are a people organization, we are a service organization. That's a fundamental choice. It was a hard choice that was made, which is not a corporate social responsibility initiative. It's an innovative behavioral initiative to say we understand what drives our innovation. We understand that people drive our innovation. Our people are our innovation, and we're going to make that choice. And the last point I'll make is Patagonia. Patagonia is an interesting organization. Many of us are familiar with them. They're a clothing manufacturer, and their behavioral innovation is around whatever is larger, 10% of revenue or 1% of profit will be donated to environmental causes. And they make those choices even when they're in the red. Now, they're a private company, and they're owned by a family, of course, and so that organization, they can make those choices to take out of savings or whatever, but they make those hard choices, which is, again, much stronger than just, writing a check to an environmental cause. So, Howard, do you want to talk about the source of advantage and add to the color around behavioral innovation?
I want to throw in a point there, just real personal, because we've our organization has dug into that, trying to look at that behavioral standpoint, talk to our people, how we can actually bring in some of those thoughts that Eric had mentioned, and it is not easy. There's no doubt that the folks in our organization have appetite for it. They would love to do it, and when you try to put the dollars and cents to it, and the value to it, unless you happen to be like Tom Shoes, and so forth, you've got to go back to the beginning when you first developed it. So it is not a real easy done, even though it has some really benefits for all folks in the organization. There's definitely a mindset that has to come together in this to make this transition. It's definitely difficult in the environment we're finding ourselves into, but it's the innovation process that we have to look through to embrace these is such that I think probably fits around this, if you want to call it innovation team or whatever else, and it has to be really cross-functional. So we have to bring people in from all aspects of the business to try to bring this behavioral thing in, because we don't want any unintended consequences along with it, and the impact really needs to be broad, far-reaching. As you can see along with the two lists there, the cost advantage yesterday was all about me. I was taking the money, I was receiving it, and that was my bottom line. Today is not necessarily just a loss, but it's a cost advantage that we could share throughout. And so we just don't maintain in our bottom line, we share it around. So it's an interesting challenge, and we hope at one point in time that we're going to be able to really get this, but it's something that really stirs our folks, our team, and we're working at it.
Application of this, of course, is something to think about in our organizations, about whether this is an innovation strategy that has legs for you. So let's wrap this up with a couple of slides that'll hopefully bring it home. There's a set of metrics here, and I know this is probably a little bit hard to see, but again, sharing the slides, you'll be able to see these a bit more upfront and personal. These metrics are just an idea of how you might measure whether or not your innovation strategies are effective. So here's a host of them, and then this is also back to that McKinsey study about the ones that are used in organizations. Some are input metrics and some are output metrics. Looking at the next slide, we just wanted to share the last thing on this related to, so what do I do? How do I evaluate if I want to do one of these different innovation strategies? So we kind of wanted to share, so here's our summary of our innovation strategy, then what are some next steps? And as we're maybe talking through this, we'll share some tools that you might consider using to help deploy these innovation strategies in your organization. So, of course, just kind of recapping, we talked about cost innovation. Probably everybody on the phone would say, we're all doing this right now, we better be. Our ability to do effectively is really kind of what really matters to drive the results that we're looking for. One way to do it is what Howard spoke about before, is sort of that bubbling up from the bottom, creating a tiger team that's cross-functional and can actually help assess business processes and potential new technologies that can drive costs out of the organization. One tool that you might use or a discipline that you might use that's obviously a lot of folks are using right now is Lean Six Sigma. So great structural process to help you assess processes or improvements in processes that can be made. And I know sometimes we throw these tools out and we think, oh great, here's another thing we need to be thinking about. But it's kind of, when we look at how do we drive cost out of the business, Lean Six Sigma is certainly one of those best practices that definitely helps us do that.
And another reason Six Sigma is important too, because it definitely is cross-functional, looks at things. And when you start talking about driving costs out, and we're talking about service organization, costs are head count, people, and when you want to start chopping costs, you've got turf wars. So you need a cross-functional team that really has a honest perspective on what they're doing.
Other innovation strategy we talked about, of course, product service innovation. We are all really familiar with that. And so your next steps on that, of course, would be, assessing the risk appetite, how far are we really willing to step out there, and really what resources do we have to effectively bring said new product and service ideas to market. And I really think, organizations, at least in our experience, and you probably will agree with this as well, in your organization, ideas are cheap, execution is quite a bit harder, and realizing the revenue from those good ideas is yet even one step further from that. So what's your tool to help do that? Those slides that we went through with that one chart that talks about where we get our ideas, raw ideas to market-ready ideas, that's one piece. And then, of course, the product service innovation process, and using something like a segment scorecard or some sort of portfolio management, a tool for you. Those are simple. But those slides are right the specific tools that you can use to be more rigorous around moving from ideas to new products and services, if that's one of the innovation strategies that you're executing against. Business model innovation, of course, we spoke about that as well. What are our next steps there? Do we need to think about a new business model or reevaluating our value chain? Certainly there's a lot of chatter and discussion right now that everybody should be doing this. And, I really think about, especially government entities right now, a lot of challenge to think about what the new business model is. What should we really be doing as government, as government service organizations? What should other organizations and communities do to provide community services to organizations? I think that whole piece is just massive right now as we're rethinking about who we are and what we do as organizations. And the great tool on that, of course, was what we talked about 2 times ago, and that was that business model template. And really great book out there that's new called Business Model Generation. Just a really cool way to dig deep into how do we really think about new business models. So those are your tools for that strategy.
And also, the old basic value chain from Michael Porter has been around a long time. Go back, and there's probably a couple HBR articles out there as well. Help you really get the perspective on this foundational, how you pull it all apart and really look at it with a critical eye.
Right. Yep. And the template that we were referring to with the business model, as a business model template, is on Wikipedia. So if you just Wikipedia business model, you'll find that. If you Wikipedia value chain, you'll find it there as well. And then, of course, behavioral innovation is the last one that we just spent a little bit of time on. And frankly, we don't necessarily have any tools out there other than to think about how other organizations are doing it, and does that really work for you? And certainly we have on there assessing the current business model for potential gaps, and is behavioral innovation something that really makes sense for your organization? And we added this as well. Determine if it just really creates value or it just sounds good. At the end of the day, we're responsible for creating value for our companies, our shareholders, our citizens, our customers. And it's not just a feel-good discussion. It really that's the whole point about that strategy, is it has to be fundamental to the organization. So Howard's going to wrap us up with some takeaways and an overarching thought on innovation.
The first point goes back to last month's article. There's big rewards for the innovation. There's big rewards for being being disruptive inside your industry and becoming a hero. There's better return on it. They're in that one particular article that came out of Bain. They've got 5 steps. We're not talking about just jumping in and willy-nilly doing things, being very, very laser focused on what you're doing, but there's huge ROI for it. The next point is consider the type of innovation that's going to make the biggest impact. So you've got the information that we've summarized here is a jumping off point. As Erica had mentioned, the new sort of behavioral change is a wonderful thing. It sounds good. Everybody like to embrace it. There's no doubt that the new workforce that's out there, the 20-somethings and millenniums, that's really something that resonates well with them. So definitely pay attention to that and see if it really can't work. Measuring the outcome is absolutely critical. What we found that in a number of the articles that I've read, that more and more companies are embracing innovation. They're looking for it to make a difference in their organizational success, bring new performance, but the challenge is around measuring it. So what we always recommend when you jump off into this, figure out how you're going to measure it before you launch into it, instead of trying to measure something that's already a moving part. And Erica had mentioned, there was a couple slides back, that there was kind of a laundry list of potential metrics that you can at least start and or tweak, but we need to make sure that what we're doing is going to really generate the bottom line we need. So plan the measurement before we launch off into the process. So those are the takeaways, the high level. With that said, are there any insights, Ryan, or questions that we had that came up?
Wasn't much feedback outside of two similar kind of questions, so try to combine them together here. But referring back to slide 28, and I'll just pull that back up. Two people, one said they're a small business, another one said they're an SMB, so we'll just call that a mid-size. So existing SMB, how to achieve behavioral innovation, specifically kind of any ideas to help identify those gaps. And that's why I pulled up slide 28, because it said assess current business model for potential gaps, and how to research or analyze this. One person wanted to know, was there anything bite-sized to be able to achieve that? Another person was looking for a resource, any direction we got to point them in.
Related to behavioral innovation.
Yeah.
So a couple things. I don't have the template on this necessarily, because it's not that straightforward. So here's a couple ideas. Number one is on the previous slide, I think, on behavioral innovation. If we go back to the one that had the two advantages, the sources of advantages, and I'm not going to be able to say his name, so Umar Haq, let's try that. He is sort of really heading up this conversation, or at least he's kind of brought it to a conceptual head, if you will. And he has some great articles on HBR. And HBR.org, of course, there's tons of non-HBR review articles there, but some blog posts and that type of thing. So he is a regular contributor there. He has a lot of articles about behavioral innovation. So I think if you want to dig deeper into that, that's one place to go from a research perspective. And again, he didn't make this up. He was just shedding some light on something that organizations are doing. What I think is important about that, though, is he's certainly approaching it from a little bit of a academic perspective. It's like really easy to talk about this. It's a lot harder to do, and that's of course what someone was asking about. So another thing that I would recommend is on the slide that had all the logos on it, and when Ryan sends it, there's embedded links, and those all go to the specific websites that talk about what these organizations are doing related to embedding behavioral innovation in their organizations. Now, it is sort of couched in that corporate social responsibility perspective, but this will give you, I think, really kind of looking at what some other organizations are doing kind of helps you assess whether or not that works for you. So that's something that I find really useful. And then the third thing that I would recommend, and this is where things overlap a little bit, I actually do think that taking out that business model template and filling it out and seeing where you can shift your thinking around making your customers and your partners and your employee partners, right? So your customers, employees as partners, and thinking about how you can actually sort of in the middle of that business model diagram is the value, right? This is a value proposition. What's the larger value proposition that you might be able to deploy when you think about your customers as partners, when you think about your employees as partners, when you think about the outcomes that you're really trying to go for past just the profit outcome for the organization. So I really do think that business model template's a really great way to get your arms around. Is this just a corporate social responsibility initiative, or is this something that we can really deploy through a people culture, a customer value creation, a company value creation? And so those are the three things I would recommend. Check out Umar Haq on hpr.org, the business model template, and then beg and borrow and steal from what some of these guys are doing, and Howard has some ideas as well.
Going back to what, Ryan's question, we were talking about smaller organizations.
Yeah.
And looking at those four, and I think that probably the partnership in bringing your customers, your employees together, and looking at together and coming out with a singularly outcome that would be beneficial to wherever the product or service is, and given a different perspective to it. I think that's something that a smaller organization could get their arms around without having to provide a huge, resource into making this whole thing come together. Investment, that's what I was trying to think. And that would probably be one place that I think that I would start if I was a smaller organization.
Right. It's asking your customers.
Yeah, your people and your customers, how can we come together to make this different, from a behavioral thing, get everybody together to really make a difference in our economy or our community or whatever that might be.
That's great. I think that's a great idea. Yep. I'll just add one last thought about this, because we've been exploring this too. We're a small organization. There's about 13 of us, and how do we effectively, as Howard mentioned, drive behavioral innovation that has that triple bottom line impact, and also make sure that we all have, we don't just sort of launch off into that. We have, paychecks at the end of the day as well, right? So we're really thinking about how do we leverage our competitive advantages and extend it past our customers to something greater than that. And then of course, and those advantages, part of those are the behavioral people components of that, but it's that larger discussion that we were having as well about, how do we take what we do really, really well and what people pay us for, and how do we extend that into a larger outcome for other potential customers or people that we're contributing to, and then of course also how does that add value to our employees' work life, and not just be like a whole nother set of stuff we have to do. So hopefully that's a little additive as well.
Good point.
Wrapping us up, we're at the top of the hour. Really fun stuff to talk about. I hope you enjoyed it. I know we did. We love to talk about this stuff and think about it and how we really make it real. That's always what we're trying to bring to the conversation. So let's have another real conversation next month, September 29th, same time, same day, same place. We'd love to know what's on your minds. Please send an email with what you'd like to talk about or anything you'd like covered to admin@mystrategicplan.com, or give us a call. If you would like to share your ideas or what's working for you, we'd love to host you, so let us know. And then of course, as everybody says right now, follow us on Facebook and Twitter at MyStrategicPlan.com to see what we're talking about over the next month. And also we always share what other people are talking about too, so it's just a really great source of ideas about strategy. And then lastly, you will be getting an email with a recorded link and supporting slides from today. So with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Ryan, as always, for bringing this great